Elon Musk has just made his most dangerous move yet. He's not buying a company, launching a rocket, or trolling on X. This time he's going after a sitting prime minister. And what's happening right now inside Britain's government looks less like democracy and more like a digital coup unfolding in real time. It started quietly. One cryptic post, just 12 words long. When governments jail citizens for speech, democracy has already died. That single post, seen by over 200 million people, sent shockwaves through London's political core. Within hours, journalists, MPS and intelligence agencies were scrambling to figure out what Elon Musk meant. But people who've been paying attention already knew. This wasn't random, it was personal. Musk had been watching the British government crush dissent, silence online voices, and jail citizens for tweets. And when the Prime Minister tried to dismiss it all as foreign interference, Musk decided to show him what interference really looks like. Sources close to Musk say this plan has been months in the making. It began after the Southport riots, when ordinary people were arrested just for posting online, when police raided homes over Facebook comments, and when a 61-year-old grandfather died in a cell after attending a peaceful protest. That's when Musk crossed a line in his mind. He saw a government that treated opinions like crimes, and he wasn't going to stay silent. He called Britain's crackdown Soviet-level censorship and accused the Prime Minister of turning the UK into a police state. At first, British officials laughed it off, but when Musk's posts started trending in 30 countries, when foreign leaders began asking questions, and when markets dipped just because of his tweets, the laughter stopped. Behind the scenes, Britain's digital watchdogs went into panic mode. They called emergency meetings with X's European office demanding Musk delete what they called dangerous disinformation. Instead, Musk doubled down. He released internal documents showing coordination between government agencies and social media companies to silence undesirable narratives. He accused ministers of blackmailing tech firms into censorship deals and posted screenshots that seemed to prove it. Suddenly, what looked like a social media feud had turned into a full-scale political scandal. Newsrooms across the world were no longer asking if Musk was telling the truth. They were asking if Britain was hiding it. And just when the Prime Minister thought the storm might calm, it got worse. Musk started dropping names of prosecutors, police chiefs and advisors who once served under the current government during the years Britain ignored. Massive child abuse scandals. He called it the real cover-up. Within days, old reports resurfaced. Whistleblowers came forward, and documents that had been buried for a decade were suddenly all over the internet. Every attempt by the government to deny or distract only made things worse because Musk had one thing they didn't: proof, audience and time. And the more they tried to silence him, the louder his message became. By September 2025, the story had reached a boiling point. Musk wasn't just criticising, but he was organising. Whispers began inside Westminster that he was backing Reform UK behind the scenes, that he'd been in private contact with major donors, even that Trump himself was advising him on how to strategically destabilise Starmer's government. The Prime Minister's allies called it a conspiracy. But then something shocking happened. Reform UK's polling numbers started skyrocketing overnight, and nobody could explain how. Hashtags, viral clips and perfectly timed stories were dominating feeds, all boosted by Musk's algorithm, intentionally or not. Suddenly, it looked less like coincidence and more like coordination. The Prime Minister ordered an internal review into foreign interference in domestic politics. But how do you fight someone who owns the platform you're trying to control? Every statement the government made was instantly dissected, mocked and memed by millions of users. Every attempt to ban, censor or fact-check only fed Musk's narrative. That the British state was afraid of the truth. And the irony: the more they tried to silence him, the more people started listening. By early October, leaked intelligence reports revealed that Musk's companies were being monitored under national security grounds. Ministers wanted to know if Starlink satellites or X's algorithm were being weaponised to manipulate British politics. Think about that for a second. A government investigating a businessman for being too influential online. But Musk seemed to relish it. He posted, "If transparency is a threat to national security, then maybe the problem isn't the truth. It's your lies." That one line hit harder than any speech the Prime Minister could make, and the public loved it. Inside Downing Street, panic turned into paranoia. Staff were told not to use social media, advisors were leaking messages, civil servants whispered that the Prime Minister was losing control, and not just of the narrative, but of the nation itself. Every press conference turned into damage control. Every headline seemed to begin with two words: Elon Musk. And as the crisis deepened, Britain's oldest institutions began cracking under the pressure. The monarchy stayed silent, the opposition stayed calculating, and the people stayed online, watching, posting and choosing sides. Now, the question no one dares ask is being whispered in Parliament's corridors: is Musk just exposing corruption, or is he engineering the fall of a government? By the time October turned into November, the situation in Britain had spiralled into something no one could have imagined just months earlier. What started as a digital rebellion had become a political earthquake, shaking the foundations of power itself. The Prime Minister's office was leaking like a sinking ship, ministers were resigning quietly, and government insiders were describing Downing Street as a bunker under siege. Every time the Prime Minister spoke publicly, Elon Musk was already 3 steps ahead, posting receipts, documents or historical evidence that made the government's denials look laughable. It wasn't just opposition parties tearing into the administration anymore, it was ordinary citizens, journalists, celebrities, and even former intelligence officials now siding with Musk's version of events. The British press tried to fight back, but it was like shouting into a storm. Musk's platform was the storm. For the first time in history, a government's credibility wasn't being destroyed in Parliament, but on social media timelines. Musk's posts were not just criticism, they were demolition. Each tweet landed like a political missile, exposing failures in the justice system, corruption in funding, and hypocrisy in government rhetoric. The more evidence he shared, the more the public believed him and the more isolated the Prime Minister became. What terrified the establishment most was that Musk didn't belong to any political party, couldn't be bought, and didn't care about diplomatic rules. He was operating on a global stage, using technology and influence as his weapons. His millions of followers weren't just fans, they had become a movement, united by outrage and a growing belief that their leaders had betrayed them. Behind closed doors, British intelligence began to treat Musk as a hostile actor. Reports claimed that secret briefings were held with allies in Washington and Brussels about how to contain the Musk threat. Some officials even suggested restricting access to X across parts of the UK if the situation worsened, but that idea was immediately scrapped. The backlash would have been nuclear. The government couldn't admit they were considering censoring the world's largest platform, not after weeks of claiming they were defenders of free speech. It was a losing game of optics, and Musk knew it. Every desperate move by the government only confirmed his message that power was corrupt, that truth was being buried, and that the public had a right to know. Then came the moment that changed everything. In early November, Musk posted a video compilation titled "Britain's Broken Promises." It stitched together footage of police arrests, court trials, and victims' testimonies with haunting music and the caption, "This is the Britain your leaders don't want you to see." Within an hour, it hit 10 million views. By midnight, it had reached 100 million. And by morning, Britain woke up to headlines about a political meltdown. Opposition parties were calling for a national inquiry, protesters were back in the streets, and government advisors were resigning in protest. Even the King, known for staying silent on political matters, was reportedly concerned about the erosion of public trust. But Musk wasn't finished. He hinted that more revelations were coming, cryptically writing, "The next drop will prove it all." Those words sent Britain into a frenzy. Speculation exploded online. What was Musk about to release? Was it about the Prime Minister's role as prosecutor during the abuse scandals? Was it financial corruption or something darker? The government tried to stay calm, insisting that nothing illegal had happened. But panic was clearly spreading. In an emergency meeting, Starmer's team debated reaching out privately to Musk to negotiate a truce. Advisors warned that confronting him directly might backfire. It would only make him more defiant. But others argued that silence was worse. The Prime Minister finally broke his silence and addressed the issue publicly, accusing Musk of spreading chaos to destabilise democracy. But the damage was done. Within minutes, Musk responded with a single line that became the most reposted message of the year. Democracy doesn't die when people speak out. It dies when governments fear speech. The response was overwhelming. Millions of users flooded comment sections with messages of support. Protesters carried signs quoting Musk's words. Even neutral news outlets were forced to cover the growing unrest. It was no longer just an online controversy. It had become a national crisis of legitimacy. And as the tension rose, one chilling rumour began circulating among insiders. Musk had obtained access to confidential government communications, emails and memos that could expose how far the state had gone to silence dissent. If that was true, it wasn't just political pressure anymore, it was existential. The government wasn't fighting an influencer, it was fighting a man with the resources of a superpower. Late one night, Musk posted a cryptic message with the words, "Tomorrow, the mask comes off." The post went viral instantly, breaking every engagement record in platform history. News anchors stayed live through the night, trying to predict what was coming. British officials reportedly held crisis calls with the US and EU, preparing for whatever Musk was about to drop. And when the sun rose over London, everyone from the Prime Minister to the average citizen was asking the same thing. When the clock struck 9 a.m. the next day, the world held its breath. Elon Musk had promised a revelation that would change everything. And as millions of people refreshed their screens, one post appeared. No fancy graphics, no speech, just a link titled The Starmer Files. Within minutes, the document went viral. It contained leaked internal emails, memos, and police correspondence, allegedly proving that during his years as chief prosecutor, Keir Starmer had personally signed off on decisions to halt investigations into organised grooming gangs in several British towns. There were notes suggesting that racial sensitivity had been prioritised over justice, that officers were ordered to avoid potential community tension, and that cases involving hundreds of victims were quietly closed. Whether every detail was genuine or not, the damage was immediate and irreversible. The public saw betrayal in black and white, and the internet exploded with fury. Hashtags calling for Starmer's resignation trended worldwide. Journalists who had once defended him now demanded answers. Members of Parliament began publicly distancing themselves from the government, calling for emergency session. Within hours, protests erupted outside Downing Street, this time not over censorship, but over justice denied. The crowd carried signs reading, "Musk told the truth" and "Protect the children, not the corrupt." The Prime Minister's office scrambled to verify the documents, but Musk had already won the narrative war. He didn't need every page to be authentic. He just needed the public to believe that they were. And after years of secrecy, people were ready to believe anything that exposed the establishment's rot. The government tried to regain control. Starmer appeared before the press, denying that he had ever blocked investigations and accusing Musk of manipulating classified information for political gain. But his voice shook and his words felt rehearsed. Musk, on the other hand, didn't need a press conference. He simply posted, "If this is false, sue me. But you won't, because it's true." The challenge was brutal and effective. Within minutes, legal experts on every channel debated the statement, concluding that silence from the Prime Minister would be seen as admission. Musk had forced the most powerful man in Britain into a no-win scenario. Fight and risk exposure, or stay silent and appear guilty. That evening, something unprecedented happened. Several senior MPs from Starmer's own party resigned live on television. They called the situation untenable and demanded that he step down immediately to restore public confidence. It was the political equivalent of blood in the water, and the sharks circled fast. The opposition parties moved swiftly, calling for a vote of no confidence, while Musk posted a new poll on X asking one question: should Starmer resign immediately? Within 2 hours, over 20 million people had voted, with 91% saying yes. That poll result was splashed across global news networks before Parliament could even respond. By now, the situation had gone far beyond politics. It had become psychological warfare. Every hour brought a new leak, a new rumour, a new accusation. No one knew which claims were real and which were manipulated, but the perception of corruption was enough to destroy trust completely. Even foreign leaders began to weigh in. Some warned that Musk's actions represented a dangerous precedent. Others applauded him for exposing elite hypocrisy. In Washington, anonymous sources claimed that Musk's alliance with Trump was influencing global strategy, using Britain as an example of what happens when governments suppress free speech. Whether or not that was true didn't matter. The idea itself spread faster than fact. Meanwhile, Britain's institutions were collapsing under the pressure. The stock market plunged, the pound weakened, and intelligence agencies warned that the country's stability was at risk. But Musk's followers framed it differently. They called it a cleansing, the necessary chaos before rebuilding truth. And Musk, he didn't post for 12 hours. That silence was louder than anything else. News anchors speculated non-stop. Was he preparing his next move, or had he already achieved what he wanted? When he finally returned, the message was simple. Power doesn't belong to politicians. It belongs to people brave enough to speak the truth. Those words hit harder than any political speech that week. They were shared by celebrities, quoted by protesters, and even printed on posters carried through the streets. The narrative had shifted completely. Starmer was no longer the leader of a country. He was the symbol of a broken system, while Musk had become the voice of a global rebellion against censorship and corruption. Every attempt by officials to fight back looked desperate. Each televised statement drew more mockery online. The government was losing control not just of public opinion, but of its moral legitimacy. Late that night, after days of relentless pressure, rumours began spreading that several cabinet members had privately urged Starmer to resign. Some reports even claimed that the king had been briefed on constitutional options. If the government collapsed, the atmosphere in London was electric, unstable, and dangerous. Protesters chanted Musk's name outside Parliament while police stood helplessly between chaos and authority. The internet was no longer a reflection of real life. It was real life, and Musk was orchestrating it with every word. By the dawn of December 2025, Britain was no longer governed from Westminster. It was governed by the algorithm. Every decision, every rumour, every whisper about the Prime Minister's next move was being shaped not by official statements, but by digital reactions. The once stable corridors of power had turned into echo chambers of fear. Ministers arrived at Downing Street like ghosts, avoiding cameras, knowing that one misstep online could end their careers overnight. Outside, crowds grew larger, angrier, and more unpredictable. The people weren't just demanding answers anymore. They were demanding accountability, justice, and resignations. The chants had changed from step down Starmer to we want new elections, and behind every trending hashtag, every viral post, was the unmistakable influence of Elon Musk. For weeks, analysts and world leaders tried to understand what was happening. How could one man without an army or political party destabilise a Western democracy from behind a keyboard? The truth was uncomfortable. Musk didn't need guns or votes. He had something far more powerful: credibility with the public and control over information. When people stopped believing their government and started trusting a billionaire more than their elected officials, the balance of power had shifted forever. And Musk knew it. Every time he posted, and markets moved, governments panicked, and narratives shattered. His silence became more dangerous than his words because no one could predict what would come next. Inside Parliament, the crisis had reached breaking point. A vote of no confidence was scheduled after weeks of political chaos, but it was already obvious how it would end. Too many MPs had defected, too many ministers had resigned, and too many secrets had been dragged into the light. The Prime Minister's speeches about foreign interference no longer resonated with anyone. They sounded like excuses from a man drowning in his own scandals. When Starmer appeared before the House for what would be his final address, even his allies looked away. His voice cracked as he said, "No nation can survive when truth becomes weaponized." The moment he stepped down, Musk posted 3 words that went down in history: "Mission accomplished peacefully." That single line broke the internet. Within hours, global outlets were running headlines calling it the first digital overthrow. Commentators debated whether it was liberation or manipulation. Some hailed Musk as the hero who exposed corruption and saved free speech. Others called him a dangerous figure who had rewritten the rules of democracy. In Berlin, Brussels, Brussels and Washington, leaders held emergency meetings, fearful that their own governments could be next. For centuries, nations feared foreign armies, but now they feared foreign algorithms. The world had just witnessed the first example of what experts began calling algorithmic regime change. But even as Britain tried to stabilise under an interim government, the question of what had really happened refused to fade. Was this truly a victory for transparency or the beginning of a new kind of tyranny, one ruled by digital power, not democratic mandate? Elon Musk, for his part, stayed cryptic. In interviews, he denied any formal interference, saying he merely gave people a voice. Yet his grin during those interviews said more than his words ever could uttered. He didn't need to rule Britain. He had already proven he could influence it. The ultimate victory wasn't political, it was psychological. He had shown that truth, or even the perception of truth, could move faster than governments could react. The aftermath was chaos wrapped in clarity. New elections were called, but voter confidence had collapsed. People no longer trusted official media, institutions, or even facts. They turned to online voices, to Musk, to independent journalists, to anyone who seemed unfiltered. It was as if the nation had split in two, the physical Britain run by laws and the digital Britain run by belief. Musk's supporters called it the Great Awakening. His critics called it the death of democracy. But everyone agreed on one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. As weeks turned into months, Britain's new leaders quietly reached out to Musk, not as an adversary, but as a power broker. His companies offered infrastructure, Starlink connections, and transparency partnerships for government data. Some ministers warned it was a dangerous deal, and others said it was inevitable. After all, how do you govern in a world where influence is more powerful than authority? The answer was becoming clearer. You don't fight Musk. You adapt to him. By the end of that year, the world had changed forever. Governments everywhere began rewriting laws on digital influence, censorship, and media control, trying to prevent another Musk moment. But deep down, they knew it was too late. The genie was out of the bottle. One man with a platform had redefined what it meant to hold power, and he didn't need permission from anyone to use it. So now the world faces a new question. If a single billionaire can topple a government with tweets, who really rules the future? Elected leaders or the architects of our digital reality?